Gen Z prefers first dates are digital instead of meeting people in the real world. They claim it's just more efficient. Thoughts?
I would like to see the parameters of when this study, so it was done by a dating app called Wingman, occurred. Because the thing is, if you were, let's say, 18 when the pandemic hit, there was a time when they were big on like Hinge and all these dating apps were like, you can do FaceTime first dates, and you can social distance and walk in a park or sit 100 miles apart and text or whatever it is. So it's not that I don't believe that there was a time when young people's first exposure to dating was it must be virtual first. It just doesn't seem like this headline is weirding me out. Prefers first dates are digital instead of meeting people IRL. Like, for how long? Because
they say just the first date. So they're saying basically you can break the ice that way and figure out.
Don't you kind of already do that on dating apps when it's like you just message back and forth for a while and they're like, okay, so now, because like the same thing, like you meet digitally and then eventually have to be like, so we're gonna meet in person?
Yeah.
You see the distinction I'm making? Like,
so it says a survey of 500 people aged 18 to 27 on their dating preferences. They found that a staggering 65% preferred to meet digitally, the most significant change since the height of the coronavirus pandemic. Users in the younger age group just absolutely don't bat an eye at it and think it's efficient. It's great. The dating app boss said that it was describing these so-called virtues of dating virtually. Also, though, one of the things they talk about is it's cheaper and life is expensive and going on a date costs a lot of money.
I believe that one.
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest part of for young people right now. It's just like you have to invest a lot of money, especially for men, right? The expectation that men pay for things, like you have to invest a lot of money up front and then we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like, I thought about that and I was like, isn't part of it like one of the most rewarding aspects of a date going well and things coming together and building a bond is like you do take that risk, you do make that investment, and then it does come together. And when it doesn't work out, that sucks, but that makes the times when it does work out more better.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's nice. I think part of it too is like you don't have to spend a ton of money on a first date. You could meet, for coffee, you could go for a walk, you could do whatever. Like this is an expectation that maybe either the culture that you're living in or the community around you might put on you, but it's not necessarily the case.
Well, doesn't the actual act of being in the same physical space also matter?
I think it really does, because I think so much of attraction is actually like pheromone based. I think people know on.
Are we going to get into the birth control
dare
discussion
we bring
right
it up?
now?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it if you want to. I've talked about it, I think, a fair amount, but separate from whether birth control changes the way women smell, or they perceive smell, which yes, it does. I think you can be in someone's company and know how you feel about them even before you know exactly how they feel about all the things that are important to you, right? If someone makes you feel uncomfortable in person, but they're easy to talk to online, like that would be a red flag for me. I think you kind of have to know early on.
There's a huge difference between the two, and I think that that's going to get harder to figure out as we get as the next generation comes in, because so many kids are growing up exclusively online and they don't have that firsthand experience. That other study that I was looking at was saying that Gen Z is going back to dating at work because dating apps because dating apps are such a mess right now that they say, you don't know.
You spend a lot of time at work. So I don't want to like jump the gun. If you want to pull the article, you
go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, Brett sent me this article, and it's talking about how Gen Z is starting to date from work, which people have always proportionally, it's always been a solid place that people meet people from the 90s. They've found this, right? That, a certain percentage of every population, and I think it's always around 30%, report that they met their significant other, their wife, their spouse, whatever, at work. And again, how many hours a day do you spend at work? Yeah. Even more so in post-pandemic era, where that was the first place you were obligated to go socially. You know how people talked about, like, after the pandemic, I stopped wanting to go out and socialize? Well, your office could still require you to go in. So if that's where you're getting your most social interactions, that seems super normal to me that you would meet someone at work.
And then when you meet somebody online, they in the article, they liken it to like you kiss a bunch of toads, having them not turn into princes, trying to find a prince. Whereas at work, there's shared social setting. You have things in common. Even if all you have in common is work, you build from there. And there's a level of cohesion there that's very hard to fake when you're meeting
Right.
digitally.
I saw this study, and I wish I could cite it more properly, but there was a study that found the most common way that people meet people is online, or is through friends, and then the next one is at work. And I think people can meet online and have successful relationships and can be totally fine. Obviously, I have expressed my personal sense that it can be dangerous because you don't actually know anything about this person, and on a dating app you can present yourself however you want to, and that means you can show up at the date and say anything, versus like if I were like to meet a guy, and so if Brett and I in our group of friends, he brought someone around and I was like, hey, I like your friend, like, can I have his number, whatever else, can he have my number? Brett obviously then knows this guy, and I have for Brett,
then I'm on the hook if something bad happens.
Brett and I have known each other for 3 years. Like, he's not going to be like, oh yeah, you can. By the way, he's an axe murderer. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there is a way to vet things.
Things
or
go
like
wrong, and she's like, why didn't you let me know? He was such a piece of crap.
Or like if I like was like, hey Brett, I have a friend who's newly single. I actually think you guys would hit it off. She loves Minnesota and you're from there, like whatever it is, it's better screening than just like with any of the dating apps where it's like we are physically near each other and I have maybe listed hiking as my hobby. Like that seems worse to me. I think
how many men are just pretending to like hiking because women say they like hiking on their dating app?
The data that I'd really like to see, whether like in person, online, whatever else, what I'd like to see is if group dates start becoming an like on the rise thing for young people, right? Because if you were like, if you were interested in someone.
Wait, how like is a group date different than like a double date?
I think a double date is being two people versus being like,
so it's like
some of my friends' parents had rules that were like,
people.
When you were at a certain age in dating, you weren't allowed to go out one-on-one. You could go out in like a group, okay, right? Theoretically, you get into less trouble that way. So like, if you were like, it's Saturday night and you could spend, let's say $50 on a date, or you could spend, $20 going out with a bunch of people who are also single, what do young people do? I don't know.
What do the young kids
bowling,
do?
let's say that. Maybe you would rather go there because you're potentially meeting a bunch of people who are also, single, looking for other people to meet, or your friend brought a friend that they want you to hang out with, but you're also getting to hang out with your friend. Like, I would want to know how our social culture changes to accommodate maybe the move away from just one-on-one talking. Like if that's what the Gen Zers are saying with this, we don't want to meet in person, maybe being in a group would take some of the pressure off, the same way that talking over FaceTime seems to take some of the pressure off. So
in this study, it says 33% of younger millennials and Gen Z workers said that they would be open to a workplace romance, comparing to older millennials, 15%, and Gen X, 27%. That's interesting that there's a gap between young and old of these generations, and Gen X being on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That millennials dropped and then Gen X went back up. U.S. workers, they're currently in a relationship with 17% of U.S. workers are currently in a relationship with a coworker, and 49% have a crush on a coworker. We got to learn
Which makes sense because that's where people spend most of their time and like see people most often.
It's what it is. It's the guy who's walking by a girl's cubicle and he makes up the fantasy in his mind that she's like the greatest thing ever, but he doesn't actually take the time to talk to her or ask her a question or anything like that.
I don't know. I feel like dating is really hard in our current culture because it's supposed to be a gray area for everyone. Like the term situationship, when people talk about, I saw this video of this girl being like, God, girls, don't worry. After 10 months, I bagged my situationship. And be like, dang, that seems very unintentional and flattering. Like you had to hang around and be like, what are we doing? And then after 10 months, almost a year, this person was like, yeah, I guess I'll commit to you.
Well, in this story,
seems rough, seems inefficient.
In this story, there's an example that someone gives where it's like, she was like dating a coworker. Or they weren't dating. They weren't but he was doing all the things but saying they're in a relationship. And when she pressured him to actually put a label on it, he said no. And now she sees the guy at work and it's really, really uncomfortable. I've always kind of been one of those people like, I dated a coworker back in the day. I just never wanted to do it again because like I'm already distracted easily enough as it is, and it's just not good for me.
And that's the thing with all of it. Like you have to be able to set your boundaries in whatever situation you're in, right? So like if you were dating, I don't understand how Gen Z could, in the culture of situationships, could have coworker relationships, because I feel like if you're working with someone, you have to be more clear about what's going on. Whereas like if you were like dating someone out in the wild that wasn't affecting your life, and like, yeah, you could be messy and do whatever you wanted to. That, to me, that's how it seems.
And the story in here is like, now they see each other at work and she like actively goes to floors she's not working on to avoid him. And I'm like, that was a completely fixable situation by just not getting a relationship with somebody you spend the most time with,
But then you can understand why people would be like, of course I'm going to end up having feelings for a coworker if you spend 40 hours a week with them consistently. Like, it's almost an exposure thing. And that's where, like, again, I'm not against dating apps all the time. I just think more people should be out in the wild meeting people, right? Because then maybe if you are like if you work 40 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours a week, and then you come home and you're just like on the internet all the time on the dating apps, you have no other social outlet. Whereas if you're involved in your church, if you're involved in whatever, you go to book club, like, you're more likely to just meet people.
Yeah. I just don't know how much that happens to you. Like, maybe I'm just pessimistic, but
I think it's some people, they pursue it and they want it, so it happens, and some people are kind of waiting for social interactions to happen to them while they're at home isolated.
Yeah. And then it doesn't happen.
And they're like, well, I have to use the apps, I don't meet anyone. It's like, but you're not putting yourself in. What are you expecting them to come out of your closet, like burst through your front door being like, I'm ready to date now? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And it is a vastly different thing, right? Like, there's a gap there between meeting someone digitally and then how you're able to actually portray yourself and handle yourself in person. And even that's like, how many hurdles do you have to get over before you get there? And then you take into account that Gen Z and increasingly Gen Alpha are the most online generation there is. And you wonder how anyone meets anyone anywhere.
Well, that's life's great mystery, right? How does anyone find anyone these days? At any of the days, really.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the benefits to online dating, or just generally our more like mobile culture, is that you're not just like in a remote farming village waiting for maybe one fellow to stumble by. Like,
well, that's what they talk about, right? It completely changed the dating game when people who lived in a remote area were now suddenly had access to people that were 20 miles away, 30 miles away. That you back in the day, you were not just separated by, your town. It was, you went to this school, you went to this church. You didn't really leave that area or associate with people a whole lot outside of that area until you went off to college.
There was this novel that I was reading, and they were talking, an old maid of some sort, maybe she's in her 40s or 50s, and she's like, yeah, this guy asked me to marry him once, but I turned him down because he was poor at the time, but I wish I had accepted because I didn't realize men were so scarce. Like, I didn't know that I was only going to only have this one shot, which is kind of interesting. I definitely think the internet encourages people to be like, well, maybe there's something better, which is sort of negative for society.
Yes. No, that's a big thing that I taught.
Okay, let me propose a dating app for you right now. What if instead of people being in charge of individually finding their matches, what if your parents and your siblings were the ones having to take applications, right? What if you were just, because they talk about, this is making me think of something else. I don't remember where in China, but there is a park in China where parents will go and set up poster boards with their kid's picture and their information and just talk to each other and be like, oh, well, I have a daughter, do you have a son? What's going on there? This is something that they're doing because they're, number one, they want their kids to get married, they want their family legacy to continue, but also they want their children to pursue relationships even if their children are maybe not willing. What if dating apps were just people sort of it was like a LinkedIn, but instead of referring people to jobs, you're like, hey, I have a sister who's not married, maybe your cousin should meet her.
Yeah,
I think that would be useful.
A lot of and then I think about the parents but how many of these kids actually want what their parents want in the what their parents want for you is going to be very different a lot of times depending on your age.
And I think when you know what you're looking for, dating becomes much easier because you can make decisions more quickly and it's easier to say up front, well, this is the thing I want and I want to get there promptly, or I know I don't want this, and so you're able to just sort of screen faster. I think the problem with dating apps is that I don't know, maybe they were created with genuine intent to get people to a certain point, but so many people aren't dating apps are willing to be like, well, I maybe want a serious relationship, but also maybe I don't want that at all, and that's actually the thing. It allows you to be sort of dishonest in a way that in-person confrontation or referral through friends doesn't allow.
As competition or as companies go, I don't know, I can't imagine that they were actually designed to find permanent love, because you're literally taking people off your app if you're helping them find love and get married.
Yeah, it is interesting. It does feel like it's mostly for casual dating. On the other hand, I do know people who have met very serious, have gotten into really serious relationship with people they've met on apps. Because again, it's similar numbers game. If you were to be like, I know exactly what I'm looking for, I'm going to swipe through 50 profiles, I'm going to go out with, 5 people, I'm going to go on second dates with 3 people, and then I know by the end of that, this is the person. That's effectively your own dating TV show. That's what those franchises like The Bachelor and stuff are kind of creating, just in a compact scale.
I love this comment. It says, love by spreadsheet in girly chat mags. I mean, it does feel like that sometimes, right? Like I remember watching this episode of a show where this woman, she had a spreadsheet. I have to be married by this year, and I have to be this. Like, she had this whole life plan that included finding a husband that was like, by this date, I need to find this person.
Yeah.
And that's crazy.
Look, I feel like it's hard, and I think it is hard when you know you want something, but I mean, it's I get a nice Christian cop out here, which I get to say, everything in God's timing, when you're supposed to be married or when you're supposed to be the person you will be. But that doesn't make the waiting or like the having to search easier, right? You can't just be like, well, in God's timing, and then sit at home and meet no one. Like,
well, I think
you are setting yourself up for failure if you think that's something you're called for.
A lot of people might think that too. It's like, well, if it happens, when it's meant to be, it'll be. It's like, no, it still takes work.
Or like spreadsheet girl, if you are like, I really, really, really want to be married before I do X thing, or like when all my friends are getting married, or else like if you're not with that person when the year arrives, that creates a sense of pressure that is very difficult because you actually have very little control over that. All you can do is like work on yourself and put yourself into positions where you're living a fulfilling life and potentially meeting someone who is interested and has similar values to you, but you can't make it happen. Or I mean, I guess you could just marry whoever is like right there when you hit that year. And if that's what she did, that's even more fascinating.
The problem is like if people haven't thought it through and they just marry the persons that right there, I think that a lot of times later what happens is they start, society tells you to always imagine that there's more and that it could be better. And that's poisonous.
Well, and it makes me think about arranged marriages where like you'll hear people say like, well, we knew we were going to get married, so we developed our friendship and our romance after. But like we are married and we don't believe in divorce, so we're staying married. Versus if you were like, well, I just want to get married, so I'll marry you, but I do believe in divorce, so potentially this could fall apart. Like you have to think about the mentality that you're going into with it. If you're like, well, I just want to be married and I don't know if I'll stick with it forever, probably just don't get married then, because you shouldn't be entering into something permanently thinking like, well, I don't know, I just want to move forward with this stage of life, even though that's tempting.
There was a show called Royal Pains.
I loved Royal Pains. Brett and I should start a USA Today network.
We should start
USA Network.
USA Network. In Royal Pains, there was a character named Divya who
she was supposed to be arranged marriage.
So she doesn't call it. She goes, it's a strategic marriage.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how they portrayed this on the show, because what they did is they don't frame it with a whole ton of judgment. They show it as this is a contract that these two have been part of their whole lives. They were essentially arranged to be married from the time they were children, and the gentleman, he's a perfectly he's
a good catch, right?
He's a good guy. He's got a good job. He's not a bad person, but they don't have a whole lot of romantic inclination to one another because it's been some type of business arrangement the whole time. And she eventually backs out of this arranged marriage. Then they fall in love later. Which is the most American spin you can put on this story, right? Which is that they don't judge the arranged marriage. They say, that's your culture, that's fine. But she's an Americanized woman who then backs out. And then he's bitter for a while. She has to like pay his family back for the wedding and all this stuff that she can't afford. And her dad disowns her for a period of time.
But then she ends up with him anyways.
And then she ends up with him anyways. And it kind of is the perfect story that maybe the problem is like that we've got 20 years of 30 years, 40 years of television and movies that have kind of poisoned us to just how complicated these things actually are. And that the fairy tale ending is going to look very different than what you see in movies and television.
Right. And I think, of course, everyone wants to be with like the best perfect partner of all time, like a spouse in like whichever way, but also they want to fall in love and have all the romance. And I think, I have relatives who have talked about stuff like this where there are basically like all kinds of marriages in the world, if marriage is the thing you're aspiring to. And like you can know someone is right for you for a number of reasons, but some relationships are more about your compatibility as opposed to like, oh my gosh, we're so deeply in love that we just can't see straight. And either one of those could work, just like either one of those could fail.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.